Tuesday night Torah class? Welcome to Tuesday night Torah class, okay? Glad all you guys are here, as well as people that are watching online. We have a new teaching aid here. Oh, that's a good idea. Turn off the middle light. It's that one, yeah. We have a display up here that I get to look at, and I can draw little pictures and stuff and show you that, he went this way and then he went that way, and that's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about that. So technology just keeps getting better and better. Yeah? Did you see my demo? Okay. Let me open in a word of prayer. Well, Father God, thank you very much for the day. Thanks for the rainy weather. Thank you for the great Sukkot that we had. Thanks for this group of people that has decided they're not too tired to come out and look at your Torah. Just help us tonight as we look at it and dive into it and talk about it, and help us learn from one another. And I know you have something for each of us to learn. Thank you for it. And thank you for the blessing of your Torah. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so last week, what happened last week was we got into Joseph's life, and how Joseph was the little brother and probably was a little bit of a, I don't know what you'd say, pesky little brother, and he told on his older brothers, and they were mad at him. And to make matters worse, Jacob, his dad, made no effort to hide the fact that Joseph was his favored son. He was the son of his real wife, if you will, the son of the wife that he loved, the son of the wife that he intended to have, and all the rest of the brothers were wives of either Leah or the concubines. And so Joseph was pretty special. And his brothers, not surprisingly, were jealous. And it said 2 or 3 times in that session where they couldn't even hardly speak to him in a civil manner because they were so jealous of him. Okay, thank you. Anyway, the jealousy got worse and worse and worse. And Jacob showed his favoritism by giving this multi-colored decorative coat to Joseph, and that made their brothers even madder. And then he had some dreams that were kind of significant, and he told the brothers about the dreams, and that made them even more jealous. So it was a fun story because you could just see them getting more and more angry, and the jealousy just growing and growing. And finally, he comes to check on them when they were out pasturing the sheep somewhere. Oh, I can show you exactly where. Turns out that Dothan is somewhere. Got to press the right button here. Whoops, I did. No, but I want to use this thing. There. It's up in here, somewhere up in here. But he went to Shechem, and Dothan is north of Shechem, so it's up right around in here. And they were living down near Hebron, I think. Well, somewhere between Hebron and Beersheba, down in here. Anyway, yes. Yeah, does it show up? Yeah, it shows up here. And it's also supposed to show up with the people. Does it not show up on yours? Okay, all right. Anyway, okay, good. So they kidnapped him, and they were going to kill him. And one of the brothers says, "Oh, let's not kill him. After all, he is our brother." So they sold him to these Ishmaelite traders that were on their way from Syria down to Egypt. So they just happened to pass right through Dothan, and they saw this. They saw these guys with this kid in this cistern, and they sold him for 20. I think it was 20 pieces of silver, and off he went. Then they took his jacket and ripped it up, and then they killed a goat and put the goat's blood all over it. Then they took it back to their dad, and they said that this was my. I sometimes am amazed at the way the Torah puts things. And if you really look at it, you kind of go, man, that's so harsh. They basically presented Jacob, their dad, with this bloody, ripped up coat and says, "Can you tell me who this belongs to?" Well, what a callous thing to do. And of course, Jacob immediately goes into this mourning thing where he rips his clothes and all his kids try to comfort him, and he says, "No, I won't be comforted." In chapter 37, I should have said we're going to start 38 today. In chapter 37, toward the end, verse 35 says, "All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, 'In mourning will I go down to the graves to my son.' So his father wept for him." And you could make a strong argument that Jacob just went into this depression and stayed there for 15, 20 years. And it also, I've come to kind of believe, I don't think his sons expected him to react quite as strongly as he did. So you can imagine, how would you have liked to have been one of these 11 guys that did this, all with the knowledge, you all shared in it because you were there, and you had to keep this secret. None of you could tell. You had to, boy, I'm surprised that they could keep that secret. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there would have been a lot of guilt associated with that, especially, what kind of reaction did they expect from their father?
Well, these guys have not been known to be very good thinkers. They probably said, "I'm sure Dad won't be happy with this," but they had no idea, how bad it would have been. I don't think.
Well, I think you'll get a sense of that from the next chapter we read.
Yep.
What's going through? If you think about what just happened, what's going through Judah's mind when he's doing what he does in the next chapter coming up?
Yep, that's fair. Also, this comes back. We also hear more about this whenever his brothers and Joseph are finally reunited toward the end of the book of Genesis, and we'll talk more about that. Anyway, so that brings us to chapter 38, right? The brothers have created this dismal atmosphere at home because they've presented their father with this terrible news, and now it's just got to be a real pleasant place to be, right? So now we are in chapter 38. Chapter 38 is not very long, and it's kind of one story, although I don't want to read the whole thing at once. Let's just read a little of it and talk about it. Let's read through verse 11. Somebody like to read chapter 38, verses 1 through 11.
And at that time it came to be that Yehudah left his brothers and turned aside to a man, an Adulamite, whose name was Hira. And Yehudah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shuah, and he took her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name or I don't know how do you say it, Er. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Selah. And he was at Kazib when she bore him. And Yehudah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Yehudah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, and Yahweh took his life. And Yehudah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." And Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. And it came to be, when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled on the ground, lest he should give an offspring to his brother. But what he did displeased Yahweh, and he took his life too. Then Yehudah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Selah is grown." For he said, lest he also die as his brothers did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house.
Okay, so let's just talk about this part. So John, I guess the first thing that you were referring to is at that time, it says at the beginning of the chapter, at that time Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. Okay? In other words, it must have been depressing enough around the homestead that he decided he'd go find something else to do, get away from here for a while. So he goes down and he finds this friend of his, Hira, who is a man of Adullam. So he was probably a Canaanite. Yeah. And he finds this Canaanite woman named a daughter of Shua and marries her. And he has 3 sons, right? So who are his 3 sons? What are their names? Onan, and Shelah. Selah, yeah. So, verse 6, Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in God's sight, so Yahweh put him to death. Now that's interesting. Does anybody, it doesn't say what he did. I bet somebody's got an idea. Mike has an idea. What do you suppose did?
Well, this isn't my idea.
Okay.
Actually, Polly told me this last week.
Okay.
The thing there. And I've always wondered what could have been so evil that Yahweh put him to death, because, I mean, we see Simeon and Levi literally murdering people.
Yeah.
You know? And,
yeah, you wonder.
And it's like, it must have been pretty awful. But she was telling me she thinks that Judah married at a very young age. In other words, he was probably just basically a child, and he was already, had a wife.
So, go ahead.
And that Yahweh was displeased with that because he didn't wait till the age of, I guess probably he was maybe in his early teens or whatever, or even just a child. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that was pretty much her take, and I thought about that, and I was like, that is an interesting view. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but
yeah, it could be. I mean, if I understand you right, what you're saying is,
but the thing about it is, Judah was the one who got the wife for his son.
Yeah,
So I mean, it seems like he would be culpable too.
it does to me too.
So it's really hard to say.
But the point being
You
is,
have to talk to Polly about that.
okay, we'll do that. But the idea is that between Judah and his wife, they arranged for a wife for their first son, when he was very young, and it was that caused the problems, and that's the reason that God took Er's life. Well, that could be, but it says here that was wicked. So something must have been wrong with him. It didn't say, John?
Well, he's a Canaanite, or at least his mother is.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is kind of like Esau, isn't it?
Yep.
As far as who he married or the controversy there. Or, I don't know if it's even worse than, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, in any case, we know how God feels about the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob marrying Canaanite wives. He's not real crazy about that idea. So the whole idea of this is kind of off from the beginning, that Judah would marry a Canaanite wife.
It's also, I mean, this just seems like a fairly long period of time.
Well, that's the one that got me. I mean, I was okay with this being
It isn't just I'm mad and I'm going to go away for, walk it off or something.
Well, I mean, I even thought more
he's
than
moving
that.
out.
Maybe this whole story, started beforehand, is what I had thought. But it's not what it says. It says at that time, it says Judah left his brothers. So that would indicate at that time being after they sold Joseph. So it must have happened pretty quick.
Well, it's also interesting that we've got parallel stories now. Obviously, the story of Joseph is the major story.
Yeah.
But then you got this, why is this even here? What's the point of this chapter?
We'll, of course, figure that out toward
Right.
the end of the chapter. But another thing to think about with respect to this whole timing deal is that if it was at this time, do you know how old Joseph was when he was sold into slavery? 17. Do you know how old he was when the brothers had to go to him? We haven't gotten there yet. The brothers had to go to him because of the famine. He was in his 30s somewhere. Yeah, maybe it might have been as old as 39. So that's like 20 years between when he was sold into slavery and when they saw him again. And so that this whole thing in chapter 38 could have happened as long as 20 years. That's all I'm saying. So it's not outside the realm of possibility. Yeah.
Do we find out whether Tamar was a Canaanite or
Well,
not yet? Do we later on? I hadn't thought about that before.
I assume she is, but I'm not sure that it actually says that. Let's read on and see if we can figure that out, though. Judah got a wife for Ur. Judah got a wife for Ur, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar, is all it says. Anyway, the thing that's interesting is, so whatever Ur did got him, made God angry enough that he took his life. He killed him, right? John.
Well, ultimately, the seed of Messiah is going through here. So
Yeah.
it isn't just some guy. It's just somebody in the genealogical line. It's important who.
Are you talking about Judah?
Yeah, I guess. But that's the woman's side. So
Yeah. I don't know either. But anyway, so the whole story is kind of a little bit strange, but Ur did something that really made God upset, so God took his life. That's in essence what it says. It says, but Ur, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death.
the fact that it was so succinct makes it. He doesn't even bother to try to explain.
No, he just basically, he was wicked.
He's so bad. Doesn't even bother with it.
We could probably go do a word study on what wicked means, but I'm sure that's what it means. So whatever he did was so offensive that God just took his life. But then we come to son number 2. Well, there's 2 things here. Then Judah said to Onan, son number 2, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. Now, does anyone know what that's technically called? Paul, did you have?
Yeah, well, that's basically being kind of like the kinsman redeemer, where he would provide offspring for his brother so that he wouldn't lose the inheritance.
Okay, that's the purpose. What is called is the Levirate marriage, the law of Levirate marriage, and we're going to get to that somewhere, Numbers or Deuteronomy, and it's for the purpose that you just stated. It's the firstborn's job is to carry on the family line. If the firstborn son dies without a male heir, then the line won't be carried on. So it has the responsibility of his brothers to step in for him and marry or take his wife as his own and to produce offspring with her, and then that offspring carries on the firstborn's line. Now, what was I going to say about that? The law of Levirate marriage.
I have a comment on that.
Why don't you speak? Because I can't remember what I was going to talk about.
Maybe it'll trigger your memory. So the one who they're trying to honor through this Levirate marriage, God just wiped him out. Just boom, you're dead.
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of an odd. I'm not saying it's not inappropriate to use that, but that would be an exception to the.
Yeah.
If there was an exception to that rule, I think this would be a good example of that.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
Well, this law of Levirate marriage, I know what I was going to say, had also, whenever it finally gets introduced, we're before Torah here to speak, so to speak. There is the son that is next in line to do this, Onan in this case, can refuse, but he's then put in a publicly shameful situation, and the next of kin can do it. The point is this the wife of the firstborn that died, it's important that she have a male offspring. That's the goal. Go ahead, John.
That's what he effectively does, doesn't he?
Who, Onan?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Because he's a barbarian.
Well.
Onan the barbarian? Oh,
Onan.
that's Conan.
Ha. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, his way of refusal was to go lie with her, but not get her pregnant.
Yeah.
Which was,
That's
that's not the way of doing it.
No, of course not. what I was going to get at. Can you think of any other benefits to this law of Levirate marriage other than the fact that the firstborn son would have an heir? Yeah.
Well, whatever, like if he's part of the tribal allotment, the one that died, that didn't have an heir, someone has to take that, right? So from an inheritance point of view, I guess.
That's fine. Anything else? Well, it serves a great advantage to the widow, because the widow, being a widow in this time was not a good thing, especially if you didn't have any family, because you pretty much were destined for poverty your whole life. So this was a way to make sure that the widow didn't end up kind of excommunicated or shunned by the family. It kept her in the family and gave her people to take care of her and the family to have, if you will. So that was another good thing for it. This law of Levirate marriage, there are cases where it's even done today, believe it or not. It's pretty rare, but there's a movie out that takes place in modern times where some Jewish guy in New York, his brother dies and he gets told, you need to marry your sister-in-law. And the movie is all about how he's not so sure he likes this idea. And it's a typical movie in that it's got some story to go along with it. But, it does happen. Of course, like I was saying, the law is also fixed. If you read the story of Ruth is a similar, it talks about the kinsman redeemer. It's got the law of Levirate marriage involved in that too. And, the Onan could have refused if this had happened several hundred years later. Yes.
He doesn't actually have to marry her. He just has to.
Good point. He just has to have,
the child.
That's right. That's right. Much like Hagar, right? Or the Zilpah and Bilhah, yeah.
So this is the welfare system.
Yep, exactly.
Scriptures.
It's a welfare system, and it also takes care of that problem that you just brought up about the inheritance. Right. Yeah. But it's okay, and yeah.
But in taking him as a wife, they had responsibilities for taking care of her.
That's right. That's right.
And probably the children.
Yeah. Well, it's
until they got of age.
Yeah. And then the children had responsibility of taking care of her until she died, if you will. But it's not at all unlike the situation with Jacob, because Jacob's wife was Rachel. Yeah. Right. These other three women with which he had most of his kids were his responsibility, and he did. He took care of them. Yeah. They were all a big tribe, if you will. But he only had one wife. So you're right. It wasn't the case of marriage, and it wasn't marriage like we think about it. But he had this responsibility. The sister-in-law became a very intimate and integral part of the family. Is what that boiled down to.
Yeah, I wanted to make another point that I heard a message a couple of days ago or a day ago that where the Canaanite woman comes in, just like Ruth, just like Joseph's wife, Egyptian wife comes in to the mix, is to include the nations.
Yep. Yeah.
In the lines.
Yeah, I think that's great. As a matter of fact, one of the things that kind of a similar thought in that line is a lot of people can take some of the stuff that goes on in the Torah and the importance that the Torah places on genealogies and all that kind of stuff and become a little bit racist about the whole thing. But God makes it real clear that you can adopt in anytime you want, regardless of your background. We can come up with lots of examples of that. There's Ruth is a great example, and there's lots of people. There's a lot of people who chose to be adopted into the tribe, and the New Testament carries on that too. And I found this I think it's like the 56th chapter of Isaiah, where God talks about the adoptions, and he even says in there, adopted sons to me are more valuable than the natural sons. Because basically, the natural sons, the natural inheritors, didn't do anything. But the adopted ones chose. They looked at this and they said, I mean, like Ruth said, she said, you know, your people will be my people and your God will be my God. And God values that highly. So there's nothing wrong from, let's see, I think from the perspective of this story, God would have preferred for these guys, Judah in this case, to marry a Hebrew wife. But he didn't just cast him out because he didn't. And he could make use of Canaanites as well.
Well,
Anybody.
I think the perfect example here is, for me anyways, Caleb.
Caleb's a great example.
And who did Caleb represent?
Ephraim.
Judah.
Oh, Caleb represented Judah?
Joshua was Ephraim.
Oh, I'm
Yehoshua.
sorry.
So isn't
Yeah.
that ironic? It's Caleb. This whole story is almost like Judah's kind of like, he's almost like acting like Esau. Like, I don't really care about this birthright stuff. I messed it all up, and I don't even want to be around my old man anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and here Caleb is like, arguably, he was more compelling when the tribes come back. If you listen to it carefully, Caleb is first to stand up and say,
Yes.
we can take these guys.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then it was Joshua later on who kind of, I'm not saying he wasn't part of it, but
No. Caleb kind of led the way. Yep.
Right. And also in Isaiah 56, I think it says, you know, why do you call yourself a Gentile once you become adopted in? You're Israel now.
Yeah.
Stop saying you're not that.
Yeah. Yep. Now, let's see, I don't want this to sound bad. Sometimes I think our Jewish brothers look at us that way. You know, okay, fine, you want to be adopted in, that's fine, but you'll never be a Jew, you know, because we're Jews and you're not. But the thing is
Like
God
you're bragging
views it,
about or something,
yeah.
you know, I
God
wanna
views
follow
it
the
just the other
rabbis.
way. He views that, you're better than the Jews just because you want to be in. I don't know if I go that far, but you know the point I'm trying to make. Anyway, so to me, it proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that it's not about genealogy and bloodline. It's about the heart, right? That's what it's really about. And that even goes into this case because Judah goes to Onan and says, your job, since your older brother died, is to produce an heir for him through his wife. And Onan, like you said, rather than stand up and try to say, no, I'm not doing that, basically cheated. And it says, based on that, says, what he did was wicked in Yahweh's sight, so he put him to death also. So poor old Judah's lost his first two sons. So now he's got Selah. So it is, Selah sitting around? Shelah. So he tells Tamar, he says, Tamar's getting a reputation, right? All her husbands die. All two of them, right? So Judah goes to Tamar and says, why don't you go home to your dad and be a widow for a while? Because Shelah's pretty young, you know? So when Shelah grows up, you know, I'll send for you, and then you know, he can do the law of levirate marriage with you. You know, you can be his wife. So that's what he did. Is that clear from what we read? That's how this is all happening? I mean, it happens real quickly. It was worth a little discussion. So that puts us up to verse 12. Any other issues there? Someone want to read from verse 12 through... Well, let's just read. It's 12 through 23. Someone. Well, Alfonso, and then you, Margaret, because you can finish the chapter. Go for it.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And after a long time, the daughter of Shua, Yehuda's wife, died. And Yehuda was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Tamar. And he and his friend Hirah, the Adulamite. And it was reported to Tamar, saying, see, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. And Yehuda saw her and reckoned for her a whore, for she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her by the way and said, please let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What do you give me to come in to me?" And he said, "Let me send you a young goat from the flock." And she says, "Do you give me a pledge until you send it?" So he said, "What pledge should I give you?" And she said, "Your seal and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." And he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. And she arose and went away and removed her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Yehuda sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. And he asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the cult prostitute who was beside the way to Enaim?" And they said, "There was no cult prostitute in this place." And he returned to Yehuda and said, "I have not found her." And the men of the place also said, "There was no cult prostitute in this place." Am I going to 24?
23.
20. And Yehuda said, "Let her take them for herself, lest we become despised. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her."
Okay. So again, you got to go back and make sure you understood what you read. So that's what we're going to do here. So when we finished, Tamar's off with her father, being a widow, and verse 12 starts, says, "After a long time, Judah's wife died, the daughter of Shua, and then Judah went through a period of grieving for a while, and he went to Timnah." Now, Timnah is interesting. I don't know if it's the same Timnah that exists now, but there is a Timnah in Israel that I've been to. Now, it's hardly even on the map here, but it's way down here, way down there. Where Timnah is about 15 miles north of what's called Elat. Etzion Geber was the name given in the Old Testament about it. And it's where the arm of the Red Sea comes up, and it's the very north end of of the east arm of the Red Sea. And so the Sinai Peninsula is between the east and the west arm. If I had a good map, I'd show you. But anyway, Etzion Geber is up there at the very top of that. Today, that's the only port that Israel has on the south. And it's, it goes from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. But within 6 miles, you can go from Saudi Arabia through Jordan, Aqaba, Jordan, and then across to Elat, Israel, and down to Egypt. There's Egypt, Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia within 6 miles right there. We lived there for a year. Anyway, Timnah is just a little bit north of Elat in Israel. And Timnah today, if you go there, you can see a full-scale replica of the tabernacle that they've built. It's kind of interesting. It's a little bit cheesy, but it's pretty cool. It certainly looks like it's out in the middle of the desert, Anyway, I don't know if that's the right Timnah, but it's certainly the right name. And it's not inconceivable that if Jacob and his clan were living around in here tending sheep, and Judah decided he wanted to go somewhere else, that he would go south. Although, it's desert, but, I'm just saying. Anyway, so he goes to, where did I get, I don't know, I kind of got off the weeds there, I suppose. He went to Timnah to get his sheep sheared. And he and his good buddy Hira went to Timnah to get his sheep sheared. And Tamar heard about it. Evidently, Tamar lived down there. And he says, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep." That's verse 13. So she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim. Now, I looked up Enaim, couldn't find out anything about it at all, which is on the road to Timnah. So, for she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. So Tamar is basically saying, you told me that you were going to come get me so that I could be Shelah's wife and have a child. Because there's, let's see, how can I put it? In this culture at this time, being childless was about the worst stigma you could have as a woman. I mean, it was almost almost anything was better than being unable to bear children. And so this was a big deal to her, and she obviously didn't feel like her station in life allowed her to go to Judah and say, hey, bud, you owe me, you know? So she did this. She disguised herself as a prostitute and went and sat on the side of the road. So Judah comes along. Verse 15 says, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. That's what my version says. And what will you give? She says, what will you give me to sleep with you? So this is a typical, the prostitute proposition, right? And he says, I'll give you a young goat from my flock. And she says, great, I'd like a young goat. Young goats are worth something. What are you going to give me as a pledge to make sure that I get this goat? Because otherwise you could just welch on the deal, right? And so he says, well, what do you want? So what does she ask for?
Just a quick sidebar. Timna
Yes.
means, and according to this, portion.
Uh-huh.
The Strong's says
In front of?
Timna,
Yes.
portion.
Portion. Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Okay. So what does Tamar ask for as a pledge? His seal, his cord, and his staff. Okay. The seal was the little carved clay thing that he would use it was like a stamp with his signature. It was his personal seal. So anybody if you ever saw that, you knew that it was Judah that had that. His cord evidently was some similar thing, and of course his staff. All three of those items were unique and personal to Judah. Yeah.
So this may sound like a crazy question, but how would she even imagine that here she is at the gate, that Judah would come by and want to lie with the prostitute? I mean, isn't that a risky proposition?
To say nothing of the fact,
not intended?
say nothing of the fact of expecting to get pregnant. Yeah, so yeah. It's the way God does things, I guess.
I'm sure she had heard. This is what the guys do. I'm sure she heard. She'd heard. This is this is what the guys do when they go sheep shearing.
Yep.
I'm sure the word
right.
got out.
Yeah,
it was. It seems like it's plain to.
Yeah.
Very plain that it's something common that would happen.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
It occurred to me that in verse 13 that she had some counsel about it. It just says that, and it was told.
Yes.
So why would they have been telling her this?
Yes.
So she may
Good
have had
point.
some counsel.
Yeah,
about what was gonna go
there
on.
may have been more than just, guess what I heard? Yeah. You should, what you should do is, yeah.
It was funny. I was going to say that maybe God inspired her, and I didn't realize that it actually had said that someone had told her that.
Yeah.
So it could have been spiritually inspired.
It could have been.
Maybe.
It could have been. But she clearly went into this thing with an idea of what she wanted to accomplish, right? Yeah.
This might be a funny question. So my question is, when he went into her, did she keep that veil over her face, or was it dark?
It's interesting that you would ask that, because I've had that same thought. I thought, how could he not know who this was at some point in this endeavor, But you know what I read? I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I read that when these cult prostitution was a somewhat common thing among the Canaanites, the pagans, because they felt like it had to do with the productivity of their crops or their flocks and herds. And so this, while it was just, to our way of thinking prostitution, to their way of thinking it could have some advantage into how fertile their flock was going to be. And with that in mind, these prostitutes did indeed keep their faces covered during the thing in order to maintain an anonymity. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I read.
And also that some considerable time had passed, so he probably wouldn't have recognized
No, and
her.
it could be, and it could have been dark.
And both.
I mean,
yes.
not at night, but it could have been in some dark room somewhere. Don't know.
Like father, like son. How does Jacob not know?
That's what I was going to say. It's no worse than Leah, right? So, and him not knowing who Leah was, and that she wasn't Rachel. Anyway, so what the deal is this. Judah leaves her with his seal, his cord, and his staff with the idea that whenever he goes back and gets this young goat, he will bring the young goat and get the seal and staff and cord back. So that's the pledge. It took me a long time to figure that out. What's the payment for the prostitution is the goat. The pledge is the thing he's going to get back when he returns with the payment.
So in the Sukkot teaching that I did was about identity, and I brought this up,
Okay.
this chapter. And he's just, it indicated to me that he just didn't really care that much about his, he was careless about his identity.
Yes.
We'll see it later on when he goes to recover it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, she's not here. Oh, well, okay, I'm embarrassed by this. Let's move on.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm not like, I've got to know this is very important. It goes back to the my thinking that he's kind of like Esau. He doesn't really, the birthright isn't important to him as it should be.
Yeah, I think it's funny when you go through all the different things where we look at Judah and Judah alone. He's not as bad as, say, Reuben. Reuben missed the whole boat. He was on the platform when the train left. But Judah, on the other hand, every now and then comes up with some things that make you think, well, maybe he's not so bad. Yeah, no, I'm just saying that it's funny. I think God does that on purpose because you look at the other end of the spectrum, Joseph. Heck, it's hard to identify what he did wrong. Mm-hmm. Joseph always had the right attitude about things. Tons. Yeah. Go ahead, Margaret.
We were just laughing here that in today's world, it would have been his phone, his American Express card, and his driver's license. But talk about carelessness, and I'm thinking, after he had done what he did to his brother, he was probably a mess.
Oh, yeah.
I would think.
Oh, yeah. Well, all of these guys.
It's like, he was probably thinking, what do I got to lose? I got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I've done this to my brother.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, we'll know.
Yeah.
We're going to learn about that toward the end of this because the brothers have been basically dealing with this horrible deed that they've done for, 20 some odd years. And man, it has taken a toll.
Similar to what was just said, that I heard a Jewish teaching at the very beginning of this chapter that says, and it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren. So it was, the midrash was, it's opposite than when you go to Jerusalem. What do you do when you go to Jerusalem? You go up.
Yeah.
Aliyah.
Yeah.
He's going down.
Yep. That's a good thing. That fits, doesn't it? I mean, not just geographically, not just elevation-wise, but spiritually. Yeah, that all fits. That's good. Anyway, so Judah does the deal, leaves the pledge, and after it's all over with, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes and goes on about her business, right? Meanwhile, I'm in verse 20. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, old Hira. Says, here, Hira, take this goat down to this prostitute. I owe it to her, and get my staff, my cord, and my seal, and bring them back to me. Right? So Hira goes down there and looks for this cult prostitute, but he can't find her. And so he asks some guy, verse 20, 21, says, asked the men who lived there, where's the shrine prostitute who was beside the road to Enaim? And they said, there's never been any shrine prostitute here. What are you talking about? What's the matter with you? So, we don't do that stuff, yeah. So he went back to Judah and he says, I didn't find her. And not only that, but the men who live there said there hasn't been a shrine prostitute here. And so Judah says, this is your point, John. Judah says, well, let her keep what she has or we'll become a laughing stock. Mine says laughing stock. So after all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. I tried to pay her what we agreed on, but I couldn't find her. So let her keep the stuff. It's it's not worth worrying about. I don't want everybody to know. Let's just forget about it. That's kind of what he said. Right? Any thoughts about that? Yeah.
It would seem like everybody would already know anyway, because you're going back with this guy, and he's saying, hey, where's the temple prostitute?
Yeah.
We need to give her a goat because it's kind of like, oh, Not just
Well,
one man,
that may
but
be-
the men of the city.
That may be why he sent Hira
Yeah,
rather than him. You know, Hira lost the bet or whatever and decided he lost drew the short straw and had to go do this. Okay, so Margaret, you want to read to the end of the chapter, starting in verse 24? If you're busy, if you don't want to, that's okay.
Okay, in 20,
24. Start reading from 24.
from 24 on? Mm-hmm. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, Bring her forth, and let her be burnt. When she was brought forth, she sent her father-in-law, saying, By the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, Discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet, and the cord, and the staff. And Judah acknowledged them and said, She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah, my son, and he knew her again no more. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon the hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that, behold, his brother came out, and she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Pharez. And afterwards came out his brother, that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was Zerah.
Okay. So, not surprisingly, as with Bible stories, right? Tamar gets pregnant, and word gets back to her father-in-law, and what's his response? Go ahead, Pat.
Burn her.
Yeah, burn her. They typically what they would do is they'd burn the woman alive. So that'll teach her. But, so she was obviously in a bad fix, but it's almost like she planned this whole thing out from the beginning. So she basically kind of under the table gets someone and says, "Here, take this rod, this seal, and this cord, and go to Judah and tell him that I'm pregnant by the man who owns these things." Right? Now, what would you do if you were Judah? Talk about the light bulb going on, right? So what does Judah say? Verse 26. John.
Well, this is where he comes across. This is one of those shining points, I guess.
Yes, this is when Judah acts honorably.
He acknowledged them and said, without even arguing, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah, my son, and he knew her again no more.
So, in other words,
which is part of Leviticus Leviticus 18:15. A man shall not have relations with his daughter-in-law.
yes,
But didn't know that then, obviously.
yeah. But so the thing is he, again, the point is well taken in that he didn't make excuses or try to figure out some way to cover this up or something like that. He basically said, well, boy, she's a better person than I am because I had promised her Shelah and never bothered to fulfill my commitment. So, pretty good of old Judah to act this way. And then the other side of the coin is when it says, and so he knew her no more. That's true from a carnal sense, but she was back in the family, right? Because she was now his responsibility. And he took care of her and kept her until she was old and died.
There's a few threes in here.
Okay,
Like there's 3 sons.
good point.
There's 3 months since she's recognized as being pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And 3
Items?
The 3 items.
Yeah,
Right. I just
that's
kind of
interesting.
thought that out.
Yeah, stuff like that amazes me because I'd like to know what those are. What's up with
Well, I
that?
always 3 is like Revelation, I think, isn't it?
Is
It has
it?
to do with it's connected to the Messiah, like 33 days in the.
Yeah.
It also wasn't. Wasn't Moses' mother, who is that? She had to deal with, she had to hide. She couldn't hide him anymore after
Yep.
3 months. I think
Yep,
it was 3
yep.
months.
Yep, 3. Okay. Any other thoughts about them? So then we have Tamar has twins, right? Now the twins are 2 boys in her womb, it says in verse 27. And as she was giving birth, one of them sticks out his hand, so some alert midwife puts a scarlet thread on it, and he pulls it back in. And then the other one comes out first. I don't have any idea what's in with that. And people that know a lot more about this than I do say that's like, that's worse than waking up and finding out you're sleeping with your sister or the sister of the wife you thought you'd married the night before. It just doesn't happen. But I don't know. In any case, it's interesting that one of them tried to get out first, couldn't, and went, and the other one that was born first was Perez. What does Perez mean? Yeah,
Breach.
to break forth. And Zerah means what?
Zerah means out of luck.
It means what?
Out of luck.
No, it means red. Out of luck.
Well, I've read that this incident has caused strife between these 2 brothers as who is the rightful
Sure.
rule of kings, because Yahushua comes from the line of is it Perez or
Perez. Or
Perez?
Yeah.
This says Peretz,
Well, okay,
P-E-R-E-T-S.
Peretz then. But you can put the
And
emphasis where you want.
but there's a lot of interesting
But sure there is.
things about what happened with Zerah and his offspring and
Yeah.
some crazy stuff.
Yep.
won't go
I
into
agree.
that.
The important deal from the Torah and the Jewish perspective, of course, is that King David comes from Perez. When the important thing for us is that Yeshua comes from that. But that's the 6 1/2 does the other, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking like contract, like breach of contract.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, that's one way of thinking of
Yeah, it
breach.
is. I had thought
Breach.
breach as in, the first one to come out was the breach. But I see that. What does it mean?
Well, I guess he breached, if we're going back to the Esau Jacob thing again,
Yeah.
he breached the contract that should have been for, he caused the Sheila, or the other one, Zerah, to be in breach by his actions, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's the pay, so it's the reason it's a FH sound, it's like that, except it has the dagesh, which makes it a hard P, and it's not the Z at the end, it's got the tzadik. So it's
TZ.
Paretz.
Peretz.
Yeah.
Okay, Peretz.
I think it's wonderful how Yahweh decides who's going to be the ruler or the leader or the
Yeah.
honored one, and he has a right to break his own rules,
Yep.
and he's done it many a time.
Yep.
It just makes me appreciate him the more.
Yep. Me too. I agree.
It also kind of reminds me of Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh was the firstborn.
Yep. And
But
we
Jacob did the
yep.
old
Yep.
breach,
Yeah,
switcheroo.
It's amazing because you can come up with just 5 or 6 places where the firstborn should have got it but didn't. And I don't know, but one of the things that occurs to me is the firstborn carrying on the line is exactly what the adversary expects. And so when God does something like this, it kind of throws him off his game, and he has to go off and come up with a new game plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always amazed, especially now. I mean, growing up in church, I never saw these Bible characters as imperfect. They were always depicted as being these holier than thou people without flaws.
Oh, I know, and they'll jump through amazing hoops to make them that way.
And here, it's like you look at this and you say, wow, this is crazy, in the sense that God is still willing to use people who are far from being perfect.
Yeah.
And, it's just it's heartwarming to know that we serve an El like that.
Yep. So chapter 38 then is the story of Tamar, Judah and Tamar. I always like to talk about this for a second. Before I actually got into the Torah too much, I was watching this movie on television. It was called Joseph. And I've got it if we want to watch it sometime. It's a long movie, but it's a dramatization of the life of Joseph. And I was watching it because I've always been kind of an Old Testament fan. And I thought it was pretty interesting. I was, kind of trying to see if it was Hollywooded. Did they make a bunch of stuff up that wasn't there? And so they got to this part here about Judah and Tamar. And I says, they made that up. They couldn't, that's not in there. And so I went and I got my Bible and I read it and I was just flabbergasted. I'll be darned, it's there. And then, so I sat there and watched the rest of the movie with my Bible open so I could check them out. It's a pretty good movie. It was pretty accurate. But anyway. Beg your pardon? It was called Joseph. It had the lead character was a guy named Paul Mercurio. It had some good actors in it. It had Ben Kingsley, I think, and, 2 or 3. Yeah. I've got it. Like I say, sometime we can take a vote. If you want, we can watch it. The only thing wrong with it's pretty long. She wants to do it. Okay. All right. I really enjoyed the movie. It's one of the more accurate of the ones I've seen. So, but anyway, that's beside the point. Let's move on. We got time. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I just want to follow up on what Paul said. Weren't God's chosen people repeatedly told not to mix their seed with the surrounding nations?
Yep.
And yet, apparently, there was this known habit of doing that.
Oh, yeah.
And how many offspring resulted from that? And what kind of problems did they sow for themselves into the future?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just seems crazy that they would do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I say, sometimes I get this vision in my mind of, like I say, God says, I can do this. Watch. I'll do it with one hand tied behind my back. Yeah.
The lure of forbidden fruit runs deep. So says John.
Okay, well, let's move on to chapter 39. Back to Judah. I'm sorry, back to Joseph. We're through with Judah for a bit. Let's go to Joseph. So, I kind of like separate it into little bits. Let me see. So let's just read the first 7 verses and talk about it for just a minute. That's pretty easy. Go for it.
And Yosef had been taken down to Mitzrayim, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, a Mitzrayite, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And it came to be that Yahweh was with Yosef, and he became a prosperous man and was in the house of his master, the Mitzrayite. And his master saw that Yahweh was with him, and that Yahweh made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Yosef found favor in his eyes and served him, and he appointed him over his house and gave into his hand all that he had. And he came to be from the time that he appointed him over his house and all that he had, that Yahweh barak the Mitzrayite's house for Yosef's sake. And the barakah of Yahweh was all on that he had in the house and in the field. And he left in Joseph's hand all that he had, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And Yosef was handsome in form and handsome appearance. And after these events, it came to be that his master's wife lifted up her eyes to Yosef and said, "Lie with me."
Okay, that's enough. That's definitely enough. Okay. So Joseph goes down to Egypt and gets sold as a slave to Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, captain of the guard. Does anybody have any idea what captain of the guard is? That's like a general. Yep. It's like a general of the army that's stationed around the Pharaoh. It's not a general of an army that's out in the middle of the boondocks somewhere. The last place I've heard this is the...
Like a chief of staff or something? Or?
No, I'm thinking of, the Iranians have, what do they call them? Some guard. Revolutionary Guard. It's an elite group of soldiers. And this guy is the captain of the guard. So anyway, it was a pretty high muckety-muck, let's say. So he bought Joseph, and it says in verse 2, it makes it real clear, verse 2, Yahweh was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that Yahweh was with him and that Yahweh gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in the eyes of his, and he found favor and became his attendant. And Potiphar put him in charge of everything in his household and trusted care of everything he owned. So in other words, it makes no doubt that Joseph's success was because God blessed him. But Joseph had some part to play in that. What do you suppose it was? You go ahead, Alfonso, first.
Well, I'm wondering, since, Egypt had all these so-called gods down there, that his master saw that Yahweh was with him and that Yahweh made all he do to prosper. So how did he know that it was Joseph's God, being that they got all these many gods in Egypt?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got a possible answer, and it's this. We know that Joseph was favored by Jacob, his father, and we know that Jacob was preparing him to take over, to carry on the family name, or whatever you want to call it. And we know that Jacob probably did a fair amount of teaching of Joseph. And so Joseph knew who God was. And so I bet Joseph told Pharaoh, the reason I'm good at stuff is because God blesses me. And so while he probably didn't, witness necessarily, he certainly didn't make any bones. This is my opinion. He didn't make any bones about the fact that my success is not from the fact that I'm so darn smart. It's because I'm blessed. It's because the God of our people has blessed me and continues to do so. That's my opinion. That makes sense, huh? Yeah. John.
I have regarding the first verse, I have an interesting insight from the Art Scroll Tanakh.
Okay.
There's a rabbi, he's a Levite, that's not important, this remarked, a slave buys the son of a slave woman, sells, and a free man is slave to both. The purchaser was Potiphar, a descendant of Ham, whom Noah had cursed, that he should be a slave to his brothers, and who was now a slave to Pharaoh. The sellers were Ishmaelites, the descendant of Abraham's slave Hagar, and the slave of each people was Joseph, the firstborn son of Jacob's favorite wife. You got to map that all out. Who's the slave here again? Who's the free man?
Okay. That's interesting. So anyway, this gets back to the question I was asking. It makes no bones about the fact that God blessed Joseph. What part did Joseph play in that? Do you suppose? I'm asking you to make it up, but what do you suppose? Paul?
I would say that if his master believed that Yahweh blessed him, then he would have had a part. Like you said, he wouldn't have taken credit for anything himself. He would have certainly let it be known. Like you said, the God of my fathers and my forefathers is the one that blessed me. But
in order
he
for
would
him,
have to be faithful in what he's doing.
yeah, I was going to say, in order for him to do that, what would his attitude have to be? Yeah, well, it would have to be, he'd have to be faithful. He'd have to believe God. I mean, I've often put yourself in Joseph's position, okay? Here he's going out to see his brothers. Now, he knows they're not real happy with him, but he's still kind of a dorky teenager, right? And so what do? They throw him in the pit and sell him to the Ishmaelite traders, and the next thing he knows, he's being auctioned off as a slave. Now, I'm no doubt he was frightened, but he has to be saying to himself, what did I do to deserve this? What? And he probably went to God and said, God, where'd I go wrong? What did I do that was so bad? And this is just me talking, but he probably ended up kind of feeling, nothing. Well, then God must have something in mind here. If I'll just pay attention and do the right thing, God will eventually vindicate me. He will show, this will work out. I'll just have to trust him. Now, that's my thought, but I don't see how he could have gotten the blessings of God and the favor of Potiphar without having an attitude like that. Go ahead, Paul.
He is one of the characters that I've always seen the most growth from the teenager who I imagine, hey guys, I had a dream. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
To that guy
Yeah.
who, the one that when they finally years later, meet,
Yeah.
it's an amazing transformation. And one of the things that is coming up, you get to see a glimpse of that too when he was put in worse circumstances.
Yeah,
what was his attitude?
Yeah.
Was it like, I shouldn't be here. I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, if I were in his shoes, I'll tell you what I'd be bitter. Boy, I'd be really, really bitter, and I'd be depressed all the time, looking for ways to escape and kicking dirt in people's face, just being a pain in the neck, because I would feel so mistreated. Go ahead.
Cut it out, Wally. Yeah, I've always thought, probably Joseph more than anyone in the whole Bible, he just had an exemplary faith.
Yeah.
And like you say, he must have had some pretty good teaching
Yeah.
from his father. And I think his father probably poured out everything he knew into Joseph. And he just took it in. And that's really what sustained him. Even going down there, he was probably a model prisoner,
Yeah.
probably made no trouble and just.
Yeah, I agree.
And
That's my feeling too, but that didn't happen by accident. Joseph had to make some effort to basically realize that attitude and that those actions were going to treat him best, be the best for him. Yeah.
Right, but like you said a minute ago, whenever he got put in the pit and sold and then sold as a slave, he probably came to the realization that, I'm in this for the long haul and God's going to protect me.
Yeah.
So when he went to work for the head of the guard, and the way he was blessed there, and he gave all the credit to God,
Yeah.
and then whenever this happened, he said, well, what's God got coming up next? So
Yeah.
let's just see.
Yeah.
And so I think his faith from early on wasn't ever diminished through any of this.
Yep. I would have, like I say, my hat goes off to him. I couldn't have done that. So. Okay. So with that in mind, let's go on. We got obviously more time here. Now, I didn't mean for you to read the stuff about Joseph being handsome, so we'll have to read that again. But let's see. Let's go through verse 20. Someone want to read from now Joseph was well built and handsome at the end of verse 6 through 20? No. I get to, if you're going to read it, I'm going to read it. It's my turn. So, okay, starting in the second half of verse 6. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day, when he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside, she caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called to her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. John?
Is Brad Kavanaugh's middle name Joseph?
So what's going on here is pretty obvious, right? She wants Joseph to sleep with her, and he basically refuses. And he doesn't refuse once, but he refuses over and over and over again. And what are his reasons? Well, yeah, she's his wife, and he says, your husband has been very nice to me. You know, he's put me in charge of everything. I've got a great deal of responsibility, and I want to do a good job. The only thing I can't have is his wife, you know? And then what's he say? He says, how could I do that to him and to God, right? How could I sin? I mean, that's again, you got to hand it to Joseph. He knows what's going on here. Interesting, huh? Dave, John.
Yeah, that is. I mean, it shows you where his head is. Who's he thinking of first?
Yeah.
How does God?
Yep.
And it's Brett, not Brad.
It's all right. I got the gist of it.
My man over here, Paul, pointed it out.
Okay, so would somebody like to read from verse 19 to the end of the chapter? Okay, Alfonso, if you want to.
And it came to be when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me according to these words, that his displeasure burned. Then Yosef's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the sovereign's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. But Yahweh was with Yosef and extended kindness to him, and he gave him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And the prison warden gave into the hand of Yosef all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there was his doing. The prison warden did not look into any point that was under Yosef's hand, because Yahweh was with him, and whatever it did, Yahweh made it prosper.
Okay, so Joseph's success continues. But let's look at this for a minute. Verse 16, she kept, okay, let's see. Verse 19, when his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me, he burned with anger. Okay? Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Okay? What do you think would normally happen to a slave in Egypt that was accused of trying to take his master's wife to bed? Yeah. I mean, when I was a little kid and I read this story, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense. You know, they wouldn't do that. Something's wrong here, right? Don?
So that indicates that the woman is maybe not saying the whole truth, or she's kind of like what's going on right now?
Yeah, kind of like. And not only that, but I think it's interesting. It says, when the master heard the story his wife told him, he burned with anger. Doesn't say who he burned with anger toward.
I think he was angry at his wife.
I do too. I do too. And I can imagine that that he got Joseph and he says, of course I don't think you did this because I've watched you, take care of all my stuff all this time. What's going on here? And John. Pat first. Okay, John first. I don't care first.
I just think he put him in prison to protect him from her.
That could be. As a matter of fact, that's good. I like that. Yeah. John?
I wonder what the garment was. Was it the coat of many colors?
Oh, no. That's got goat's blood on it and sitting in
Oh, they already
Jacob's.
took that?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also he had to kind of save face because she called the household servants in and told them the story.
Yeah.
Kept the garment there, so when he comes home now, so he has to save face one way or another because his wife made this accusation.
Yes.
How's he going to deal with it?
Yeah,
Is he going to
yes.
not put Joseph to death, but put him in prison, like you say?
Yeah. By the way, from what I read, do you know who runs this prison? Put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined? He does. Yeah, it's Potiphar's prison. And he puts him there. And the thing is people knew, the fact that he wasn't killed was probably a slap in the face to his wife.
Yeah. And he probably told the head guard to take care of this guy and don't let anything happen to him.
Yeah, yeah. And not only that, based on what happened in the last paragraph here, he almost like he came to the job with a resume, with a recommendation, because it says that, but while Joseph was there in the prison, Yahweh was with him and showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. So basically, Potiphar says, here, I got to put my favorite slave in prison. Don't ask, I just have to do this. But I'm telling you, you ought to let him run things because he's very good at it. Well, I'm sure Joseph thinks it's a demotion, for sure.
Let's just call it a lateral movement.
The lateral movement, yeah. We used to call that the lateral arabesque in corporate America.
This is not what I said, but when I said, was it promotion or demotion? Brother Marvin over here said, no, that's what you call cross-training.
There you go, cross-training. Yeah.
Well, this is all important because his ultimate job is viceroy of Egypt. So you don't just learn that by
that's a good point.
mistake. You
Yeah.
have to have something on your resume that says you know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a good point. Yeah. Whatever.
Kind of the same kind of a thing that when Moses was
Yes.
taken in to the palace, he was trained.
Yeah.
And David married the king's daughter and lived in the palace for some time. So he was being trained for what he would later become.
That's a very good point. I guess I've tried to do that, and sometimes I've been successful. Not often, but whenever I'm going through some period of my life that I think is particularly gross or unpleasant, I'll ask myself, I suppose God's got some reason for this. I'm supposed to learn something here that I can use later, And that has happened a time or two, but not near to the extent that it's worked with Joseph. Yeah.
Along those lines that you're saying, when we look at adverse circumstances, examples in Scripture, when did the Israelites see the miracles when they were in the wilderness? They were in the wilderness, the manna, all the blessings and things like that. But it also gave them an opportunity to see what was in their heart.
Yep.
So here Joseph is going through unfavorable circumstances, and we can see how it changed him or helped him rely on the God that was blessing him, even though he was in adverse circumstances. It was going to come out okay. He had to have faith in that and believe in that and be honorable about it.
Well, that's a very good point. But again, looking at it from his perspective, I'm sure while he was running Potiphar's household, he was thinking to himself, God, thank you for blessing me. I'm really glad that I'm in this position. This is, if you got to be a slave, this is a pretty good gig, So thanks a lot. I miss my family. I don't know why I'm a slave. I didn't do anything to deserve this, but I appreciate the fact that it's as good as it is. And so then Potiphar's wife pulls the dirty on him, and he ends up getting thrown in prison. It's got to be another big test for Joseph, right?
Yep.
Just a second.
So while you're doing that, that's part of what I mean is that he's undergoing these tests and he's not getting bitter. Like you said, if you were going through that, wearing his shoes, those shoes would be hurting your feet, so to speak.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. So I'm sure this stint as trustee in the prison wasn't horrible, but it was definitely a step down. He's got to feel like, man, what's going on here? I'm not doing anything wrong. I didn't, how did this happen? Again, yeah. Well, I hate to start another chapter, but I tell you what we'll do since we still have 5 minutes. Let's read it anyway. We'll read it, and then next week we'll talk about it. This is fun, huh? I like this stuff. The story of Joseph is great fun. Yeah.
Did anybody point out that this is the first prison ministry?
No, nobody pointed out, but that's pretty good. Yeah. It's this boom. Yeah, right. Okay. Does anybody want to read? Want me to read it? Oh, Mike will read it.
Mike,
Somebody else wants to.
Mike,
No, you go ahead, because I've read, Alfonso's read, you can read.
Mike has the mic.
Okay.
Mike
How
has
far
the mic.
down?
Why don't you just read chapter 40 in total? It's only 23 verses.
Okay. And after these events, it came to be that the cupbearer and the baker of the sovereign of Mitzrayim sinned against their master, the sovereign of Mitzrayim. And Pharaoh was wroth with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was a prisoner. And the captain of the guard put Joseph in charge of them, and he served them. So they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker of the sovereign of Mitzrayim, who were confined in the prisons, dreamed a dream. Both of them, each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with its own interpretation. And Joseph came into them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in confinement of his master's house, saying, "Why do you look so sad today?" And they said to him, "We each have dreamed a dream, and there's no one to interpret it." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to Elohim? Relate them to me, please." So the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph and said to him, See, in my dream, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded. Its blossoms shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. So I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days Pharaoh is going to lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you shall put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former ruling when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it is well with you, and please show loving commitment to me and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For truly I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done naught that they should put me into the dungeon." And the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, and he said to Joseph, "I also was in my dream and saw 3 white baskets were on my head. And in the uppermost basket all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, and the birds ate them out of the basket on my head." And Joseph answered and said, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 baskets are 3 days, yet within 3 days Pharaoh is going to lift off your head from you and hang you on a tree." You probably didn't want to hear that. "And the birds shall eat your flesh from you. And on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, it came to be that he made a feast for all the servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his post of cupbearer again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. And the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him."
Isn't that the saddest verse? Isn't that the saddest verse? I mean, it tells you kind of how Joseph's life was. You know, he says, I'll tell you the interpretation of the dream. In 3 days, you're going to be free, and you're going to go back to Pharaoh. And when you do, tell him about me. You know, remember me to Pharaoh. Tell him I'm here unjustly. I've been doing all this, and, you know, it's not right. And so at the end of the chapter, it says, but the cupbearer forgot about him.
Eventually does remember, right?
Yeah, he does. But I just think that's a sad verse. Now,
Well,
rather
that's
than, go ahead, John.
No, that's right.
Rather than dismember this and go through it, which I'd like to do, I'd really like to keep the time. So why don't we, besides, it's fun to do this, you know, on a weekly basis. Let's give us something to talk about next week, right? This Joseph stuff is just great. Has anybody else got any comments or anything you want to mention or talk about?
I'm just sad about Joseph because his brothers didn't like him, so he's in the back of the bus.
Yep.
They tried to kill him or they put him in a pit, so he's in the back of the bus. He gets sold, he's in the back of the bus. He has it good at Potiphar's house.
Yeah.
Then the missus comes in and lies about it, so he's in prison, so he's in the back of the bus.
Yeah.
And then now he's in prison, he's doing good, and, helped the cupbearer, told him about his dream. There he goes again. He forgot about him. He put him in the back of the bus. So I'm sure all these back of the buses someday is just going to be the driver of the bus.
Yep. That's what happens, as you know. But yeah, you're right. It's just a very interesting story. Okay, let me close in prayer. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for these stories, especially this one of Joseph. It's got so much in it that we can learn from, and it just gets better. So bless us as we go through the week. Help us to think about these things. Think about him and the experiences and the things he must have felt. Be with us until we meet again next week. In Yeshua's name, amen. Thank you, guys. This was fun. I like this. Thank you. No, thank you.